Verena Paravel and Lucien Castaing-Taylor. When the global pandemic began, you were working on a new project called De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which is the Latin title of famous Vesalius anatomy book published in 1543, which translates to the fabric of the human body, which was halted ahead of the shooting. So you just won the Films After Tomorrow Swatch Award to the most innovative international project worth 30,000 Swiss francs. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When the global pandemic began, you were working on a new project called De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which is the Latin title of famous Vesalius anatomy book published in 1543, which translates to the fabric of the human body, which was halted during the last months of shooting and just before the beginning of the editing process. So taking part in important surgical procedures means being part of a team that works under a great deal of pressure. How did you win the trust of doctors and the support of the various departments of Paris hospitals?
I would say, Lili, actually, with the shooting is ahead of us. We've only done some testing shooting so far. And at every stage, both in the field work and the pre-production that we've done so far, and in all of the filming that lies ahead of us, we have to win the trust of the patients and the doctors and all of the medical staff every day. We've been going to the hospitals in the north, the public hospitals, the welfare hospitals in the north of Paris over the last 2 years. And obviously we've been able to establish quite long-term relationships with many doctors. Patients come and go, for the most part, more quickly. They're more ephemeral. But in every case, every day, even when it's with the same person, we have to establish trust anew. There's nothing taken for granted. And what's amazing, actually, is that we initially started this project in Boston. We wanted to film it in Boston. And trying to get access to the hospital system in the United States is absolutely impossible. Even if you're a TV station, you have millions of dollars to throw at the hospitals because they're petrified of any evidence that could result in a lawsuit. And what is staggering is how we didn't expect that we would be met with such open arms and such curiosity. I think on the part of the doctors, it's perhaps because we're anthropologists rather than filmmakers, and they're fed up with cinematic representations of the medical world, which for the most part they see as very exaggerated, very spectacular, very false. And they're hoping at the same time for something that will be more accurate, more authentic, more credible, more recognizable to them from us. At the same time, they know that anthropologists typically go and study cultures a long way away in different parts of the world, and they often make jokes about how they are our tribe or how we are objectifying them. So I think they're curious about what kind of a exogenous, what kind of an outsiderly anthropological look we're gonna have upon them. They don't know whether they'll recognize themselves or not. But so far they've been incredibly open. But it's true, every time we go in, we have to reestablish, I would say, people's confidence in us.
Yeah. No, but you're right that they see. I mean, what I understood is that they see us more as colleagues. They're dreading journalists, and because they know also one interesting thing is usually when you say that you're gonna stay, when you start a project, and you say that it's a project that might last for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. It can scare people, but in the case of the doctor, the longer we say that the project will be, the more confident they had in us, because they see it as a form of research and science, and as Lucien said, it's something that they were expecting, and that they were really curious about what will come out of the point of view we were trying to have on what they're doing.
But did you present your project more on the interior aspect, like use the new cameras and go inside your body, or more on what their actual job work would is, and the fact that we can see a surgeon, for example, operating while talking about, I don't know, his dog or his weekend or his wife or whatever. So, I mean, were they more interested in the technological, very specific aspect of your project, or more the fact that they would be represented in a more, I don't know, casual and not dramatic as they often are?
I don't know. I mean, when we start a project, we never really explain in detail what we're after, because we don't know exactly what we're looking for, and we try, and they see us trying. And most of them, they were super interesting, and they saw us like trying different camera, trying different technology, and they were extremely excited to see that we were trying to basically, one of the idea is to try to mimic what you see inside, and to conjugate that with the outside. And they saw us recording sound and trying to see what we could come up with, like coupling this inside and outside.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question. I think different people probably anticipated or expected different things from us. You mentioned, Lili, the casualness of their conversations. And it's true that the longer we stay, the more they let their hair down, the less performative they are, the less camera conscious they are. And in many ways, the more interesting and the more credible they become. And there are these moments of completely unscripted, spontaneous, contingent serendipity that as anthropologists we find the most interesting and the richest. And that when we start filming for real, they will be the ones that we will be after. But it's not a typical observational film, as you said. It's not a portrait of everyday life in a hospital at all. It really is trying to look at the body in a new way. And I think the fact that they realized initially that we wanted to appropriate their technologies to an end that was non-medical, and that we saw an aesthetic purpose in instrumentation that for them was purely instrumental, that was purely medical, that was purely technical, intrigued them. It never occurred to them that there was it never occurred to them officially that there was a kind of an aesthetic potential to what they were doing. But a lot of them, it's to be sure, when they are in front of their images, even in the middle of an operation, do exclaim at the beauty at what they're beholding, even though they're in front of these screens, often doing 10, 15, 20 operations, depending on the kind of procedure a day. But I think the fact that non-medics and non-filmmakers, that anthropologists thought of this as something of interest and something with human meaning and potential was intriguing to them. Whether we will like the result and whether they will like the result and whether the patients will like the result remains to be seen.
I think we're also looking at them in a way that is unusual, because the operating room is a space that has so many rules and so many safety rules, let's say hygienic rule, that you if you have a conventional camera, the result can only be very familiar, because you can only film them from a distance. But since we create a camera that is resemble a laparoscopy camera, like a camera that goes inside, I think we basically, the way we're filming them is very close to the way they're looking at the patient themselves. So there is also this dialogue between the way, usually in an operating room, they put the patient at a distance. So the patient is hidden behind like all sorts of, I don't even know the name in English, champ, we say in French, and to put it at a distance. And the way we film is just like very much non-invasive, but this camera, because it's so tiny and non-invasive, allow us to really approach them and look at them with the same intensity as they looking at their patient. So they're also curious about that.
We've also, when we've been the camera was developed by a Swiss amazing engineer called Patrick Lindenmeyer from Zurich. And it's called a mini lipstick camera that he's jerry-rigged to approximate, as Verena said, the aesthetics of a laparoscopic camera. But when we've been practicing with it as we lead up to the real filming, we often have got so close at times to the fields that, you know, the surgeons realize that we're mini invasive, but we're hyper invasive at the same time. We're in their faces. We're often 2 eyes away from the surgeon's eyes. And they realize that when the filming starts in earnest in the fall, that we will be, or in the winter, that we will be extremely close. And obviously we have to make sure that there are various precautions that we have to take to sterilize our equipment and to make sure that we don't infect anything.
The journey through bodies is based on an unusual point of view, which has its own narrative. It has moments of stasis, others of acceleration. It captures important details while hiding other important details off screen. What did you find out about the new language created by these sophisticated technologies?
I don't think, for us, we don't feel we speak with 2 voices, so I don't know how you feel. But I don't think of cinema as a language. I think I'm attracted towards film precisely because it's not a language, because it's much messier and more open and more unruly and more evocative than language. And there are always narratives or proto-narratives, even when you're trying to get as far away as possible from narrative. I think we humans, whether we're in front of the camera or behind the camera or around the camera, we're hardwired to create narratives, you know, out of thin air, even when there aren't very interesting ones around us. And I suppose on anti-narrative tendencies to do justice to the magnitude of the world and of reality in ways that narrative tends to foreclose and to attenuate, is always stymied by the resurgence of narratives that we can't control. And you're right, even when you're inside the body, there are narratives. There are narratives that are activated by the movement of the camera, by the pulsation of the body, by the blood moving around, by the instruments moving around, by the conversations that can be heard. And they have different rhythms, they have different temporalities. Sometimes they are frenetic and spectacular and intense, and other times they're extraordinarily serene. At times, of course, the imagery itself is extremely gory, or fatty, or abject, or off-putting. At other times, it seems extremely meditative and restorative in different ways. And I don't think we can ever anticipate what the narratives or the temporalities will be. They will also change as we film, and then in editing, when we start synchronizing the imagery from inside the body with the audio and the imagery from outside of the body, then that will create a relationship between the interior and the exterior that we can't begin to imagine, that I don't think anyone could begin to imagine. That I think the inside of the body will defamiliarize the regular view of the medical world from the outside, and that in turn will make us look at and hear the inside of the body in a way that is utterly different from if you're just looking at it on a medical screen in a surgery.
Diseases are a symptom of what is changing in society and how people react to these changes. What did you discover about the outside through the inside?
I mean, I'm not sure if we discovered anything yet, because we're, at the beginning. But there is one interesting thing about the hospital as a very special place where you see, it's a kind of a microcosm where you see things happening there. And this is not coming from me, but this is coming from already years of research and conversation with medics, where the hospital really works as a space where you can see things happening before they happen, basically, in the rest of the society. And when doctors tell you that, and we actually witness it too, you see right now, I mean, when we were spending a lot of time there in hospital, you see things very sharply, like sexism, the rise of consumerism, where the patient are becoming this king patient where they need to be treated that way, or being, they're paying for a service and they want this, and more it's becoming. You see the rise of religious extremism, Islamophobia, but also like Catholic extremists. You see, question of life and death when you have like someone who is there in the hospital for like 9 months, and like some the question can be raised, like, and that this person is not going to survive. So you have all these ethical questions, and yes, the hospital is a word in extremis where you see things happening before, and what we've seen is that like racism. So
how did you see racism or Islamophobia or extreme Catholicism? How did you? I mean, how did it?
Because there is a lot of violence, especially in the emergency room. Because if you go to the birthing room, like a salle de naissance, you have men who don't want their wife to be helped, even to give birth by a man. So they exige a woman to touch them. They don't want a man to be the obstetrician, because you see some patient coming there and hitting some nurse because they want to be treated like super quickly, and sometimes you have to wait for hours in the emergency because there are other people who needs to be treated more urgently. You see poverty, you see actually everything. But in this condensed space, it's sometimes very dispiriting to see the amount of misery, actually. Yeah, and also and because the hospital is also a place that reflects like other things, like economical. It's a space where you see political, economical, moral dimension and of the rest of the society. And the hospital in France has been almost abandoned, and there is the lack of money, and so it's a whole system that reflects like other suffering outside of the like outside in the like more in society.
But did you work only in the emergency? No, you didn't, right? Because
No.
You went to very different departments. But would you say that this condense of society and misery is more present in the emergency room, or for you it was like this in every?
I would say that in the intensive care and in the emergency room, in other words, in areas which are consumed by crises of different kinds, where tensions and tempers run really, really high, then in those moments of crisis, latent societal problems and forms of prejudice rise to the fore more overtly, more extremely, because people are on the edge of being out of control. So that's when they're at their most visible and they're the most audible. But conversely, I would also say the longer, and you're right, we've spent relatively little time so far in the emergency room and in reanimation, in intensive care. When we film for real, we'll be spending quite a bit of time in them both, but we'll be spending a lot of time in the morgue, which paradoxically, all of the medics and paramedics who work in the morgue describe it as a source of succor, as a kind of refuge, as a haven of peace. And a lot of them are retired nurses and who've had enough of suffering, who can't bear witness to suffering anymore. And they, in a sense, we modern people have so little exposure to dead bodies that the idea of a morgue is very intimidating to us. And yet it draws soignants, it draws healthcare professionals who go there because they find it a soothing and calming place as they try to restore the newly dead, try to restore to them a form form of compassion, a form of self-respect, a form of dignity as they prepare them to be seen by their families and to be buried or to be cremated. That's just one example, but there are many different other parts of the hospital. And I would say the longer we do fieldwork, the more we spend time there, the more we find that the staff and the patients to some degree, but the staff let their hair down. And obviously when people let their hair down, then prejudices also come out in different ways, as they do among all communities.
And during the COVID crisis, did hospitals become off limits to you too? And what further so did the period of the pandemic produce regarding the project?
So I don't know how to say. So become off limit meaning we could not go there. So we were abroad, and we came to Catalonia to do some research on a project, and border closed, so we could not go back. We were not allowed anywhere, not even in the tiny village down the valley. And we started to receive some email and phone call from the surgeon, the nurse, all the medic and paramedic that we already have been spending time with, and they were all like telling us, what are you doing? Like, you should absolutely come, you should be here next to us and witness this moment. But we could not, and I'm not sure that we wanted really to do that, because it was a moment where there was lack of equipment for the nurses, and I don't see how we would have been like more, our witnessing or taking images at that moment was more important than a nurse having proper equipment to protect herself. And anyway, we could not go anywhere. We were completely locked down here with no internet, with like almost nothing. But what happened is that at some point there was some, because the whole hospital was like reshuffling and reorganizing itself in order to respond to this crisis. Some surgeon basically stopped, they were stopping their surgery, and we were in touch with a couple of them who started to do some a memory, like a digital memory. So they called us to ask for some advice, and they say, I have a camera, I'm setting up this Zoom between some women giving birth and their husband, who are not allowed anymore in the hospital. And I'm setting up this Zoom conversation between like a father who is going to be intubated and put in a coma with his family. And the doctor telling me that it didn't occur to them that this could be like an amazing way of recording and witness this first encounter with a baby, like a new way of giving birth, of being there in the world, or caring for someone, like soigner, providing care. And so we got some ally in the hospital, and so they were filming, and they were taking picture, they were recording. We had a lot of nurse and people in the emergency room also, like sending us every night. They would go back home, and after a day either at the morgue taking care of like dozen and dozen of people dying, or people in the emergency room or intensive care, and they would come back home at night, and they would send us this long detailed account of what they have been through, and we have all these recording of that, like a diary, but like either audio or visual diary. So we were connected to them almost on a daily basis. And it was very new for us too, because we never say that we are director, because we're not directing anything when we're filming, because this is not the way we work and this is not the way we see ourselves as filmmaker. But for the first time, it was a little bit of like having this, connection. We were kind of directing some doctors and surgeon and nurse, and they were our DP at a distance, and we had this conversation very often. So that was a way to be connected to the hospital, but not directly. So we were kind of delegating, which I find it's super interesting. Also, at that moment, not to be the one witnessing and filming and capturing images, but having the doctor themselves doing it for us. So I think it was a really interesting collaboration.
So, yeah, more generally, this unprecedented and dramatic interruption to film productions brought by the pandemic has highlighted the fact that even in the best conditions, a great deal of time often goes by between the inception of a project and its completion. How do you deal with this reality? I mean, as filmmakers, like between the desire of a project and the actual, I don't know, first day of shooting? Or do you not considering yourself directors and you're not facing this this issue, like this sometimes so long time between a desire as a filmmaker to film something and the actual possibility to do it after financing, writing, blah blah blah?
I mean, it's true, we don't consider ourselves to be directors. We don't really consider ourselves to be anything, but we can't pretend that we're not anthropologists, even if we try to pretend we're not. And our background in anthropology definitely, for better or for worse, does inform what we do, the way we think, the way we are in the world, and our methodology. And years of interrupted fieldwork, which anthropologists call participant observation, is part of the course as anthropologists. So having it be interrupted for 3 months shouldn't be a big deal. Fieldwork is often interrupted for months, even years. And it's true, while we were doing our earlier research and our pre-production, that in itself did not need any financing. But now that we're moving into the main period when we'll be filming, to be able to have this award is incredibly enabling, especially coming on the back of 3 months of protracted separation. For all of the collaborations that Verena mentioned between us and the doctors, the patients, the medics of different stripes, and some patients during the era of COVID, it was, I think, a very anxiogenic, a very stressful time, because it was very hard for us to contextualize, as we couldn't help but think about the film. And it felt very peculiar to be thinking about it in an isolated valley in Catalonia, in a state of complete isolation and separation and stasis, as you said earlier, wondering about the weight, the amplitude of COVID in a film like this, and whether it should be foregrounded or whether the film is in a sense about something that's much larger than the COVID, but should COVID have a place or not? And these were discussions that I had with myself and Verena had with herself, and that we had with ourselves on a daily basis. And hopefully the film will be richer because of it and more sensitive to the particular inflections of our time. But we'll just have to see when it comes out in the end. Okay, it was stressful to have this interruption, this hiatus, but we're used to stress and we're used to interruptions. People's lives are interrupted for a multiplicity of reasons. It's rare, of course, that we should be able to, there's something cathartic for all of the crisis of COVID, there's something cathartic about the fact that it was something shared at a societal, even universal level that is still with us now. Cathartic's the wrong word, but there is something about the notion that it is a collectivity, that you are participating in something larger that is very different from more isolated forms of disease and stress and crisis, I think. But how it will pan out in the actual film God only knows.
Okay, well, that's super interesting. Do you know that with this award, you will have to design the official watch of Locarno's next edition?
Yes, we heard that. And we're extremely excited about that.
Do you already know what you're going to do?
We had a few ideas that we need to discuss a little bit more, but it's a little bit secret for now, right?
Is it going to be trash? Is it going to be
What?
trash in the French sense? Like, is it gonna be scary? Is it gonna be like some bloody organ, you know, as we can see in the movie?
Maybe.
Okay. Okay. So Verena and Lucien, it was really nice talking with you, and I wish you the very best for your beautiful project. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're so jealous that we're not in Locarno, but so happy you are.